can we make the master branch or the main branch or whatever you want to call it of ZFS more usable by people so that testing in production or, quasi-production of ZFS happens before the release is cut. Like right now, if people, the number of people using the development branch of ZFS is very low because you basically have to roll your own thing for whatever operating system that is to be able to do so.
In FreeBSD land, didn't Martin Matrushka agree to have at least latest release or what?
FreeBSD current is probably the only general way that most people would get access to unreleased versions of ZFS a bit early. But like if there was a repo of, RPMs for Red Hat and whatever the apt packages of deps for Ubuntu and so on, how many people would be interested in that? And can we,
I see a hand going up.
Get more mileage on the development version of ZFS so that the releases are not finding bugs that, people find in the first couple of days after they start using.
Right. It's not a great sign when like you release a patch release and then we find a bug in it that's just like the first time anyone deployed it at scale, we hit this and are testing that it deployed it at scale.
Just say what is having it out kernel the way they are. I think that would be straightforward.
Well, the complexity is every distro uses a different kernel and your package is tied very tightly to the kernel. So it requires quite a bit of work from the maintainers. And so, at Clara, we maintain some repos of customized versions of ZFS for customers or even just newer ZFS on older Ubuntu to keep it working for them. But, would there be, maybe we could do something like this for the development versions so that we can get more of this kind of early testing.
We have a vote from the kitchen to do it on Debian because they're doing it already. So someone's got to build it and test it, and he's tasked with that. If it was made easier, he won't object. So there's that.
You should just send a replication stream while you're testing, and then we're good.
Well, by default, the replication stream goes back to being compatible to ZFS from like 2006. So it doesn't have most of the features it does, by default, unless you're using Zelta that finds the greatest common denominator set of features, by default, replication uses the lowest common denominator and doesn't use any of the new features. Yeah, because ZFS replication is unidirectional, the default is to not use any features. And you have to opt into each feature because you have to declare the other side actually has support for it. Otherwise, it assumes go back to, V28.
And
Capital L.
Nope.
Yes.
So are you collecting the features, putting them in the send string for Zelta and manually?
Okay, there's a default and then they exclude if they don't show up on the other side.
No, the microphone here if you want to use them. And Mr. Bacula. Yep, that's you. Hey, light up that mic. Does an organization like yours as a backup provider really, really want an LTS version of OpenZFS that just is focusing more on stability than new features?
LTFS for tape?
LTS, no, long-term support.
Long-term support.
I mean, backup companies, as I mentioned earlier, like we want to back up everything from everywhere to everywhere. And we don't really have a lot of choice in the matter. So, I think I think you might have asked me this question.
Directly to prime you, buddy. So
Basically,
having thought about it,
is that, what can happen for us is if people are running hot code and they're having problems because of a bug in ZFS diff or just a bug in ZFS general, it makes it harder long-term support for us makes it easier to set up fewer test environments. So if somebody's running some hot code, trying to replicate their issue can be difficult. Because you have to decide, is this a bug that's just existing in ZFS or is it part of a non-long-term release? Most customers that are paying for backup are running long-term release versions of operating systems because they want that stability. They're not really trying to be bleeding edge with things unless maybe they're using a feature to, advance their concern for a very specific reason that they might want to be using something that's not long-term.
So, do we know what the versions being shipped by major enterprise distributions is? Like, I don't think Red Hat's got one, right?
Well, so like Zombie Linux ships, I think two one. No, that Ubuntu ships 2.15 with 24. No, 2204 is 2.15 and 2404 is 2.32.
Yeah.
I think so. And Rocky, I think, ships 2.2 something as well. It depends on which kernel you're on and which version of Rocky and so on. Kind of to this point, all of the requests we've ever gotten are for newer ZFS on older LTS operating system, never the other way around. But that's probably because if they're on the older operating system, they're fine with the older version of ZFS they already had. But yeah, most of the requests we get are, we love ZFS and we want that new feature, whether it's the newer block reference tree stuff or newer fast dedupe or just, the fact that ZFS 2.3 performs a good 10% better than 2.2 most of the time. Just means that, people want the newer stuff. Nobody's asked for the development version. I think we have one customer that is interested in the hierarchical performance thing. And, the people we wrote the raw send for, we give them a repo with that patch before it got upstream. But now that it's upstream, we don't have to do that anymore.
From a LTS person, the reason the LTS is there is for compliance, not for features. It is a line in the sand. This is where we're at when you're talking with auditors or anybody doing Muscat analysis and drivers
and application support and that kind of thing. But it's supporting a third party's request for such and such a thing.
It's a baseline point where everybody can say, I meet this standard of LTS. Quick question.
What does LTS mean to the notion of a meaningful external libzfs? It's like, it's stable and predictable and consistent and all the things, but you can't have that.
You can never change it for 5 years at a time. Okay, 5 years.
Ooh, there are things in life that I don't want to change very often at all, but anyway, it's like cars.
But if libzfs has to support every feature in ZFS, then not being able to change it causes problems.
If there tells me versions with the versions with it.
Yeah, but the problem is when a version's with it, but your third-party application ties to version X, and then you switch to newer ZFS, and your Python can't talk to ZFS anymore. Yeah, that's you're not meeting the goal of LTS of, the ABI is stable,
and that's where normal brains. I need this room. Okay, I need this feature. I'm accepting that risk. And I know what those risk points are versus somebody who just downloaded and inserted the USD.
Put it to continue and say, hey, I'm running Linux now. So probably all use Rails.
In the case of my one anecdote of it was I made some changes to make ZFS list 14 times faster, but it required adding an extra parameter to some of the calls in libzfs, and that broke all of Delphix's appliance. Oh, and they were very upset about that.
So I sort of the other side of this, and this is an issue that we've wrestled with a lot in FreeBSD, where we're integrating external vendors' long-term support that has a different cadence and timeline from our long-term support. And that actually causes a lot of problems for the security team because then they're committed to supporting something that the original vendor has said, this is dead, go away.
Yeah. There's no version of OpenSSL that lasts 5 years anymore. And even if it did, if we pick a version 3 years into its LTS-ness, and there's no newer LTS-ish thing yet, then we're still stuck with 2 or 3 years at the end of that where we're on the hook for doing the maintenance, even though upstream has moved on.
So, put a different way, there are going to be operating system packagers who have a concept of LTS. Is there, so like, let's assume that OpenZFS per se does not want to have a long-term release itself. Is there anything about the fact that packagers are going to do that anyway that should inform the release process, the maintenance process of OpenZFS to make it less terrible when those bug reports come in?
Well, yeah.
Or
It'd be really nice
divergence
to see
between those?
people talk to us about which version they were going to use before they picked. It's like they picked 2.15 and there was a really, really important fix in 2.16. That would have been great if they had.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly it. Is by signaling an LTS, you have recognized it as the developer's idea of long-term stable,
Right.
not
to Garrett's point,
the packagers out of,
at the time, ZFS's concept of an LTS was probably like 2 or 3 years of we'll keep patching this.
Sure.
Whereas Ubuntu's like, well, we're going to have to ship it for 5 years. And our dates don't line up. Like we do our release in usually November-ish, even if we aim for October-ish. And they're doing theirs in April. And, that's generally helped in that they run 2.32 or 2.15. There are a couple of point releases in. So most of the rockiness is dealt with, but it's still not, we can't get it to align.
Because in February is making it movies.
Yeah. And we do ours in November. Maybe the timing doesn't work out. And then it's like, well, FreeBSD tries to have their release at around the same time. So, FreeBSD 15, the betas of it ship with ZFS 2.4 RC2 in hopes that the release will be done in time to not hold up the release of FreeBSD 15.
Stepping back, quick question for the about roughly 20 people here. Do we have 20 definitions of LTS? Point of order.
At least 21.
24. Yes. There is a Latvian joke, which is 3 people meet and come back with 5 political parties.
Before you come up for you.
Perfect. So,
The idea of a fast release cycle came up with my boss this past week with OpenSSL. The fact that I think in the last year they've shipped 4 or 5 different releases. And I guess the question is now, with all of those coming out in the last year, are any of those making it into some of these long-term, like Ubuntu releases?
I mean, the sudo cache from 2 weeks ago, that made it into the LTS support, Ralph. And that's probably the mechanism that needs to be looked at. Because it is critical. But, Ubuntu has never shipped a single patch for ZFS after they've locked a version in LTS.
Right, but if we had like a canonized LTS version at any given time of ZFS, maybe that would provide enough signal to them that like, hey, patches are going to keep coming to this. Maybe we could get them to actually update their ZFS version with those patches.
Or the people that actually care will roll it out.
Yeah, I guess the question more panel, what promises shall we make to make them update ever? Because we're already, we at the point of branching of new branch, we promise no new feature will appear, pool will be compatible. Later, after like about a year, we more or less, also with run checks, as part of check style, we verify API compatibility. So should not break unintentionally. Shall we, like after a year, after we start the second branch, we should promise that API will never change no matter happened? Will that promise be sufficient for the distribution to actually start updating at that point?
Well, at this point, they wouldn't cherry pick the 4-line fix from 2.16 back to 2.15 that they ship to avoid the problem when you got over 4 million inodes.
If they want to pick one line, then what are we talking about?
Yeah. like basically how to badger them into cherry picking the fixes.
I'm looking to the point they should never try to cherry pick. They should update to our next release. But for that to happen, we should promise them that we won't break X1Z whatever, and enforcing API check, I think, is the most we can do, and stability after a year, I guess that's the best we can promise at all, if anything.
If we had written a CVE for the 216 fix, maybe they would have pulled it in. I don't know. Like, honestly, I'd love to have a conversation with them about what their criteria is to decide these things, so that we could make a process that would give us influence over what they pull in, or let us signal to them, hey, this is one you want to pull in. Because right now it's just a black box, and I've had no success getting a hold of a live person that's involved in the ZFS part of it.
Yeah, I don't have any contacts either, but
They came to a leadership call one time, and that's when we told them, no, you can't use the same key for ZFS encryption in the installer on every machine and then change key after. So we saved them from that. And you think that would be a lesson about, hey, we should probably ask these guys about everything, but then did.
And so like the other challenge now, and I assume the other vendors have similar options, is that certainly with Ubuntu, long term is longer term than that.
Yeah, you
But like,
pay for
yeah,
10 years or
you
something.
know, we pay for 10 years of support for old Ubuntu LTS. And that is certainly much longer than, OpenZFS
Has
as a product has the capacity to continue to provide fixes for.
How do you handle OpenSSL? Like,
I mean, I hope Canonical has decent developers working for them. And it is definitely hope, because all of our previous experience with Canonical is not that great. So
Once they switched everything to Snap, and that's their focus for Workday, is gone sideways.
So maybe invented PBIs.
Yeah.
Yep. So this isn't here to.
it'll be here tomorrow, I think.
I mean, honestly, at work, we've been talking about, should we switch back to Debian because Canonical sucks?
He's doing that.
She's taken that. But we've done 18, 20, 22, 24.
And not releasing number 24. Everything else is going dead.
Which narrows the scope, for lack of a better term. It's like, well, what does a kind of developmental release and LTS for FreeBSD, for Debian, reach out to the project, get them on the leadership calls, find who the liaison is, not this whole secrecy thing that never works well in open source. What? Debian. They don't work with partner projects. Like what? Secrecy. Great.
Hi, Rob.
Oh, hello. Like, Mike.
I just got back from the shops and tuned in and heard, and all I was going to say is, in my opinion, if the only operating systems or projects or whatever that count are the ones that actually turn up at OpenZFS, which is a bit like what Ala was saying. Ubuntu are in their very latest. It's not their LTS, but their very latest. That they've made a commitment that they will always ship the very latest kernel. Which means in their testing they are running pre-patches that we have for unreleased kernels. And it's just like, maybe, but you've got to turn up for that. And if you can't just run unreleased patches kind of thing and require us to support them. Similarly, if they've got 10 years if they're selling 10-year LTSs, then turn up, spend some of that money. Get, if your customers are demanding it, be there. I don't mind Debian so much, because Debian are doing a bunch of work with us at the moment, mostly contributing their packaging and updating the Debian packaging we carry in the Git tree to kind of better match what they're doing and produce better quality packages. It's like, for me, I'm like, that's great, brilliant. That doesn't necessarily mean they're always going to ship something that I think we should support, but I'm far more willing to work with them. And similarly, FreeBSD. I mean, I recognize that FreeBSD operates on, a different release cadence and that sort of thing. But on the other hand, anytime there is something not right with FreeBSD, in OpenCFS, FreeBSD people are actively paying attention as well. But if I break something, like I think I broke in development, we never released this, but I think I broke something in like the way page writeback handled. I pinged one person, we hashed it out over like a couple of days, and it was sorted. It's like, because they do the work, they show up. So that's pretty much the end of it. So I think that's what Alexander was saying. Like, if like, what are we aiming at if they're not actually even in the room?
I just wanted to point out briefly that, when I'm thinking of something like a long-term stable, I'm really thinking of, what are the feature flags we're supporting at that level, and what ones do we think are good enough to actually be used, at least from a user's perspective.
Yeah, and even in general, if we've had this question a couple times, especially if we start getting more people using the development branch, right now, zpool upgrade nags you is if there's any feature flag you don't have, it keeps nagging you to turn it on. And if you create a new pool, all the features are on by default. There's many cases where, building, as we're, demoing a new dataset feature or a new pool flag, it'd be useful to have it be, not necessarily automatically enabled, but at the same time, if it's not enabled, if nobody uses it, it doesn't get any testing, and you have the opposite problem too. But yeah, for an LTS, our as Matt mentioned, our current setup is like, once we ship 2.1 and 2.2, the set of feature flags for that isn't going to change. But maybe there's always a tension between people who are using that branch and want the administrative features and the command line improvements and little things versus the people that don't want anything to change. And to some degree, I'm a little more in the camp of, once the release is done, maybe it's better to not touch it much. But at the same time, people having to wait a year for the next ZFS release has an issue. But also, if their distro's not going to pick that up until their next release, then suddenly you can have this gap where it's like, yeah, ZFS has all these new features, but I can't use them until 3 years from now. And so there's this constant tension between, if we backport new stuff to the stable branches, it gets use, and that's great. But it also has the risk that, hey, if we keep changing things in the stable branch, then there's a chance that that will disrupt something. Yeah.
I mean, I think sorry, did you want to go? Do you guys? I was just going to respond and say that, from my perspective, the only thing that should be changing in that stable branch when you're not pushing out a completely new release on it is bug fixes.
Right, but when you say a release, are you talking about 2.19 or 2.2? If you're at 2.18,
that depends on how you interpret the version numbers.
Yeah, well, and what is a stable branch? Is that, and yeah, but everybody's opinion on that one is different, or most people have more than one opinion on them.
Well, and so to circle back to the original context of the discussion a little bit, when we were talking, the original context of the discussion, for anybody who wasn't here or wasn't listening or wasn't on the call yet, was trying to get Illumos and OpenZFS to reunite with each other a little bit. And in that context, Alan, you have a good point about, if you don't ship any feature updates into the long-term stable branch, then it's going to be years and years before people actually get to use the new features. But on the other hand, right now, the Illumos state of affairs is that a bunch of stuff just never gets moved into the Illumos tree because, they don't have enough internal demand for it necessarily, and they're not confident enough in its long-term quality because bugs happen over time. And so right now they're in the worst state of affairs where they have a totally different code base, so we're not working together at all, and new features take a long time to get there or never get there, and they have to separately manually figure out what all the bug fixes are, pull them in for the things that specifically apply to them. And so having a long-term stable release that did only do bug fixes, we canonize 2.5.1, this will be a long-term support release, it will have no new features, it will 2.5.10, 2.5.11, 2.5.12, and like just put bug fixes in that. Maybe it wouldn't be good for everything, obviously, right? There would always be some people who want new features would not want that. But for people who are
that's a great way to break it. Say, hey, this is how we OpenZFS are doing it.
Mhm.
Do the dot ones have a specific meaning in OpenZFS? I should know that.
No, I picked it at random.
And should they?
Well, to Paul's point there, one of the things we did before, because of the sprawl of feature flags, was defining, in addition to, TrueNAS-24, that would be whatever feature flags were supported by that version of TrueNAS, there was just an OpenZFS standard, like OpenZFS-2024,
Right.
and OpenZFS-2025.
Did that take off?
I don't know how well that's been maintained, but if we used that to basically have not version numbering for the LTS, right? We ship, ZFS-2025 is the LTS for 2025, and that maybe happens to be 2.5.1 plus patches that come after it or whatever.
And maybe minus a few things, just if it's super experimental.
Right, or whatever. It is basically, yes, the version that only ever gets the serious bug fixes. We're not going to fix manual pages things. We're not going to fix little things. It's just the absolute minimum set of changes. Maybe there's some interest in that, but I don't know. And then, does it get that much more complicated to deal with the sprawl of how many different versions of ZFS are we trying to keep working at once? As it is, trying to do 2.1, 2.2, and 2.3, and now 2.4 is getting crazy, and we're going to basically drop 2.1, but that's probably the version that's used the most because of Ubuntu and Red Hat, and then like the Rocky Linuxes and so on. And, it gets complicated quick.
Yeah, it would certainly take resources to do an LTS style thing, right? We would need to have maintainer time and testing time and all these things that are dedicated to this. And so
Tony's not here right now.
Yeah, that is true.
And it sounds like Brian will be here. So some of this is their territory, but what I do want to prime it and first document those 75 definitions of LTS and stable among the 20 of us, because wow, that is multifaceted. And
To what you were saying about Alan about the doing a year, doing a 2005, 2006, whatever, 2025, you know what I mean? I think that fits exactly with kind of what my definition of an LTS would be.
Oh, there's a hand raised.
Go ahead.
So our LTS is currently 2.2, which we're just about to finish when 2.4 comes out. Just so we know what we're talking about. But are we talking about disk format here? Because or feature set? Because we have a roughly yearly release cadence right now. So
I think, we guys, the beginning of the discussion was getting a Lumos back on board. Okay, part of OpenZFS, and they want those version that's very, very, very stable.
right. So, and for that, I mean, we could basically, we could rebrand, 2.4 as the 2025 or 2026 release or whatever. That seems like they're about close enough. But again, have they explicitly said, I say they, I realize it's not one single thing, but have they explicitly said, we are willing to do this work if there is like a line drawn here?
No, they
because-
basically said we're not willing to do it because there are too many bugs.
Right.
The only way
Because
for them to get less bugs is not to run master, but run stable branches. But then they couldn't run it into main tree because how would the jump from a branch? It would less in history.
You can do it. There's a way to solve that problem using Git submodules. You can have like a tree as part of the tree that you would do separate. Like there's a way to orchestrate it that would make it work.
I was thinking like some sort of out of tree builds. Or
This is part of the build system stuff that I was talking about that is solvable, but like interesting in its own way. But
Well, and part of this also stems from Lumos's slightly different way of doing things, where patches exist in kind of vendors' own trees, and only once they're proven stable do they go into the Illumos tree, whereas OpenZFS works almost exactly the opposite. New stuff goes into OpenZFS and then trickles down to a vendor, and then eventually gets into a product. And I don't know that there's a way for people to test features before they're in OpenZFS.
I mean, there isn't exactly, no, at least not disk format changes, but we have talked about it before. We've talked about a lot of things before, and they are always often with, here's how we would tackle this, who wants it? And with something like this, like I personally will go to the work of working with someone on the Illumos side to get OpenZFS back there, because I personally want to see like OpenZFS on every operating system, and that's a lot of work that I do off on my own. But I don't want to do a bunch of stuff if we're just guessing, oh, we have too many bugs. Well, we fixed all the bugs. Yeah, well, we don't want this. It's like if someone turns up and says, A, B, and C, this is what it will take, even if it's a massive amount of work, like we can do that, we can target that, but otherwise, like I'm not saying I don't see the point in this conversation, but it's so hard to know what anyone's aiming at. And there's lots of first steps we could take, but if we don't actually know what we're aiming for,
I think that's a
I
really
don't know, it's battle in us. So
yeah, and so I mean, we do need to have those conversations with Illumos folks, but the part of what I was hoping for from this discussion is figuring out what's the scale of things we would be willing to think about as ways to try to make this happen. Like, would be willing to think about doing something like an LTS? Would it take increased testing investment? Like, what are the things that could make this a possibility? What are the things that we think we as a community could try to make happen?
And so thank you for giving me all the in-between context. I have been listening while I've been doing other stuff, so I've been kind of keeping up. But so the thing I was thinking with whatever we call an LTS, if we were just talking about on disk format, that's one thing. If we were talking about a release, like a release train, which effectively keeping 2.1 or 2.2 alive longer, like that might be a thing as well. But then I start to think about right now you can't run 2.1 on a kernel, I think much beyond about 6.1. Because we haven't made any of those patches there. There are 4 major kernel releases a year. Are we going to have people who want to run, LTS 22, ZFS LTS 22 on, not even experimental Linux, like the last, Debian LTS or Debian stable, which will become LTS, is 6.12. So are we then putting kernel patches onto this, kernel support patches on this? Because that means, 4 releases a year. That also means a bunch of refactoring, and churn, and I think fairly safe, but that's an easy call for me to make. So there's a lot of different, and there's probably other facets we can draw the line from.
Linux specific?
Yeah, so if I can make a comparison, and I do think that it is a Linux issue, but certainly,
I mean, that's where most of your users are.
So I'm also, following OpenAFS, and which is also another file system, and it's mostly used on Linux platforms. And 90% of the OpenAFS stable branch releases are nothing more than make this work on the latest Linux kernel because they broke the API again.
I mean, maybe we just say that's a carve out for that, but I don't know, because it depends. Would a whole bunch of people go, oh wow, ZFS without the churn, without the worry that there's a bug in the latest feature? Would a lot more people go for that straight up? Maybe, I don't know. They certainly might prefer it to, you only get the fixes for your Linux-based file system when you get the newest kernel, which is bananas to me.
So, is there any? Yes, sir.
So is there any remaining demand for this? Like, I feel like we've kind of walked ourselves out of most of the things we wanted. Is there
Point, both we and Illumos would prefer they were on board in OpenZFS, and they would like to have access to the newer stuff. It's
Yeah.
just maybe still a lot of expectation mismatch, and part of that might just be everybody's definition of what these words means is different, and it needs to be spelled out a lot more clearly on both sides.
Well, I view the Lumos thing as sort of being completely different, like from the Linux kernel LTS idea of stability. So I guess that's where my confusion was. But is there any feature of LTS that is wanted by anyone for Linux systems? Or if we
You mean
sort of talk
a long-term support version of ZFS, or you're talking about like the kernel thing?
Well, sure, yes. From Linux to provide a stable interface, that would be lovely. But no, I mean, did we end up deciding no LTS?
No, I don't think we decided anything. Sadly, most people would, a bunch of people would like an LTS, but everybody's definition of how strict that LCS should be, like what mix of fixes it should get, it should be like critical fixes only, every fixes, and the ability to keep it working on newer infrastructure bits, like what the criteria are for what's eligible to be merged into the LTS branch is still very much in flux. And also how much capacity the project of OpenZFS has to maintain this LTS, or how many LTSs and so on, is a different thing.
So who would pay for it?
And
yeah, I don't mean this in a like, where's the money coming from? I mean, who values this enough that they would pay for it? And what do they care about? Like, Ubuntu apparently doesn't care enough to show up to free meetings to ensure their own stability. Maybe they don't realize that that's what they would get, and that's a communication problem. But is there anybody else? Like, are there vendors that want to ship an application on ZFS that want stability, that want not new features?
That I don't know. I know there are vendors that want the newer features on their older version of the OS, and they've come and we've done that for them. But that's
I mean, so the classic way that it's always worked for vendors of Linux-based products is, well, they pick one version when they built the product, and that is the only version you will ever have.
Right. And then there's the pain of the major upgrade.
Yeah.
And that's basically the model Ubuntu has currently, right? They ship an LTS, it has this version of ZFS, and they never touch it, even when there's a critical bug fix.
One standard I was thinking of is, you're mentioning you want to get rid of the support for the latest, or the eldest supported release. What would it take you to say, nope, we will keep that one and we will stop supporting the one after it?
So keep 2.1 and drop 2.2 instead.
Correct.
Right, because that's kind of what
What is the world in which you would do that?
Honestly, I think the biggest drawback right now is we don't have a good breakdown of what versions of ZFS people are actually running. If more people are using 2.1, maybe it makes sense to keep 2.1 instead of 2.2. Right now, since lacking that data, our decision is based on it's a lot harder to maintain the much older version than to, backport fixes to a version that's a year newer than the current oldest one.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, some of this has to come down to developer capacity. Certainly, in the FreeBSD project, we discovered like having 3 stable versions at once is kind of untenable. And so we changed the release schedule so that we only support 2.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you have a version that is quote unquote stable, but there's like only one developer who ever cares to backport things to it, then it's not so much stable as dead. And, you know, I don't think you're doing the community a service if you claim that, well, this is a really, really stable release, when in reality, you're just not paying any attention to it at all.
It's so stable. It's not moving anymore.
Yeah, well, and
So-
to some degree, that's what people are wanting is a version that never changes, but they also want it to get care and feeding and a pony. Well,
Yeah. And I mean, there's is that it becomes interesting when we start to talk about performance features as well, but which I don't figure. But leaving that aside, I mean, I've made it very clear here. I'm very much of the opinion that you know, any vendor who turns up gets help, and any that doesn't. However, I will. A possible different argument is, and I don't know how much I believe this, but if we were to offer this sort of a stable base that we sort of guarantee people can build off, and we make it easier for vendors and vendors to work with us in that respect, does that actually widen the pool of developers? Does that make it easier for people to get started? And it is chicken eggy, but I don't know, and I don't really have the inclination to find out. But that's me, I think.
Does anyone in the room have a cadence of any project that they just love? They may or hate the project but love the cadence. Is there just a great feeling cadence for long-term support and stable branches and blah 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 blah?
Is Debian in production, which I ran for many, many, many years, in a previous life. I always ran the LTS, and even once. So Debian will support they support the current stable, they support the previous stable as their LTS, and then they actually have a separate LTS team that will maintain it longer for that, and they basically just ratchet down the amount of base system support you get. And then there isn't even they actually have commercial partners who will do like ultra long-term support. So I think you can still run Jesse 5 years after it's out of support, and they'll still support it for you. So I used to run the LTS for a couple of years past its use by date, and that was because our deployment infrastructure we didn't want the base system to change ever. But thing is that we did want to change the application software that we wanted to continually upgrade. We would write our own build support to build out our own packages and deploy those. And I really like that model. I cannot imagine replacing the foundations of my house every 3 years. It's mad, but I will definitely switch the furniture out over 3 years, right? So yeah, that's.
So
I was looked at weirdly, even in my own company. But anyway,
So I simultaneously love and hate the FreeBSD release cadence. I like the idea of like every 2 years we do a major release. I hate the time of year that it happens because I only have basically 2 windows when I can do major changes, and they are between Christmas and New Year's and in the summer. And the summer window is nice and big, but if you're like bringing out a release that's in, December 1st, that is not nearly enough time for me to actually like test, to deploy at Christmas. And I've certainly pointed this out. This is one of the reasons why we ever take like a .0 or a .1 FreeBSD release, because the schedule is such and sort of the long tail of bug fixes is such that we just don't want, we don't want to be stuck with something that we deployed as a .0 in December, and then all of a sudden we have to change everything again, on an unscheduled basis in, March, April, May. But overall, I think particularly like, having the regular cadence of minor releases is, a very helpful thing. And then we can choose that sort of fits better in with our schedule, and we can choose, okay, well, this summer we went to 14.3. We're not going to take 15, but we'll take 14.4. And then probably, 15.1 or 15.2, whatever is the current 15 when that happens. Which obviously also influences which version of OpenZFS we have as well.
Because you won't get the RAID Z slow sit out until you get to some 15 based.
I will stick with the takeaway of quality, because you kind of want it all to be good. And there's the narrative. I hope it's true that for the most stable open BSD, you run latest because people test the crap out of it and then only put it in and trickles whichever direction quite safely. That's the narrative. Let me know if it's accurate or not. So let's use that to segue into Test Suite tomorrow and other topics. And Rob, if you want to close us out with some brilliance from down under, let her rip.
No, I got nothing. I'm just unpacking the topic. No, I just had a question. That is, and it might be people in the room, if you are using an enterprise support, an enterprise supported Linux distribution, that ships with ZFS, and that may only be Ubuntu, what is the thing that stops you? So what is the thing that stops you updating ZFS from upstream rather than just using the one in Ubuntu, and anticipating the answer, which often is there is a compliance thing that says we can only use what's in the supported operating system. If you are a paying operating system customer, are you then yelling at the vendor and saying, I'm paying you for this, I actually need this thing, I have to get it through you, it exists over there, how do we make that happen? They might not be questions for today if you guys have to go, but anyway.
We do pay for, whatever the hell they're calling Ubuntu Pro this month. And, we've never had that particular issue with OpenZFS, or honestly with anything else. Basically, we're just paying them for security support. So that's sort of where we come about. We just, we're kind of slow, and our cadence of rototilling research systems is just enough disaligned with the cadence of any long-term support release of anything that, people sometimes need to be able to pay money for the peace of mind that they will get security patches on this otherwise antiquated operating system that nobody is supporting otherwise.
Yeah, I think in general it's not rare, but people need to have a specific use case to have the kind of dire need for a new ZFS feature. There are a bunch of people who are in that case, backup companies that want newer BRT, and people that need fast dedupe, or there are just performance fixes specific to a certain configuration, or
Is that standard alone?
things like that mean they have a strong need for a newer version of ZFS because that's where the feature is. But even them, most of the time, would prefer an LTS style thing. Once I got the feature I needed, I don't want anything else to change again. There's not as many people who are after just, I always want the latest ZFS.
To that point, how coupled are feature flags such that you can so frame them and isolate them that you can push them way the hell back or not, and pick and choose easily as opposed to difficult?
it would be easy, but it's the feature that
The
Flex
feature
had
itself.
that there's some interdependencies and mostly just, the change in the code around Lazille, for example, between 2.1 and 2.4 is massive. Everything's changed.
Got it.
Or like,
Cool.
when Mav did the better prefetch code and the 2 layers of arc in the arc, those changed a lot of code, and it's much better now, but it means that any future change to the arc is going to be really difficult to backport because it's based on this newer code.
Perfect examples. We will not solve this tonight, but please keep thinking about it, and let's identify what I'll first say feels right, and then let's see what's implementable in practice. And it keeps coming back to quality, because if every possible version was stunningly stable, it's like it doesn't really matter what you grab onto. But
As on things that would further improve quality?
test suite is one that's on the table of like
Right.
no one likes
What
it.
about the test suite?
KSH first comes up, and then
So you're saying it's too hard to add new tests? Is that what you're
you're part of that conversation.
Right now, I'm just focused on getting the test suite running in a bunch of places and seeing what explodes. I have no conclusions yet.
Rob might have other thoughts. We had a call about this, so
There's a slot for this tomorrow, right?
Yeah, specifically, but let's just prime of how it relates to LTS-ish things that might not matter if things were fantastically quality oriented, but hey, I want to pull you through.
Well, I think most of what people would consider quality are not things that the test suite is well suited to, right? It's not, does this feature do what we expect in isolation? It's what happens under this much broader set of circumstances where we're doing a bunch of different things at once. And, the work the younger guy from AWS did here last year to make Z-test be able to run exactly the same test a second time to debug them quicker. I wish that had gotten into a PR.
That did okay.
It was just a hackathon, so he only had an afternoon's of work of it, but he got far enough that it would have been really handy to have.
and they're AWOL.
One of the 2 people who has a badge, so hopefully they'll be here on Monday.
Hold back.
Yeah.
Great.
Anything else at this time? I'm Chuck. Stu, how you doing? Sorry. Well, let's do our little wash up dinner, and thank you everybody for me to do the mic.
Doing performance tests in the test suite is difficult because in the cloud you don't know what the performance of a disk is going to be, and physical hardware is just as many gremlins.
Actually, that's a great point. So, Rob was, I brought up performance testing with him because so I'm just trying to get into testing. I figure if I'm going to contribute, I should at least, not break stuff. So that seems like testing is good. But performance testing, he mentioned, is not remotely where it needs to be in the central code base, but that there may be like secret performance tests that vendors are using to make sure that their customers don't yell at them.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have feelings as to where that could be usefully improved?
I don't have a good grasp of what infrastructure would have to exist to be able to reliably test things.
Okay,
So
that I actually am deeply acquainted with.
Yeah. As an in FreeBSD, one of the developers maintains a GitHub repo called NetBenches.
Okay.
And it is looking at the forwarding rate, packets per second of routing that a FreeBSD machine can do. It's got a certain subset of machines, like 6 machines going from a little Denverton Atom thing up to a big server.
Okay.
With the same NICs, and it runs the same benchmark on different versions. And you can see commits over time, how they affected performance.
Okay.
Something like that for ZFS would be great, but I've never seen anybody get a disk to perform as
The
same way twice like a network card mostly does.
Okay. So, but if I could get you the same, man, this is hard because I can imagine negotiating to get you cloud
And
Develop
much,
infrastructure,
much,
but
much harder.
That's
anything in the cloud is exact system on top of
Oh no, yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, what if you're going to do it on? I mean, you could maybe get it on something that has local NVMEs and do it again, the local NVMEs. But then if it's not a
as you boot different instances, they're not gonna the disk is born differently.
Right.
Like maybe you could use provisioned IOPS, which are really expensive from AWS, to know like I'm supposed to get 1,000 IOPS. Am I getting 1,000 IOPS? But usually what we're looking for is, much hairier end of the spectrum where, buying that many provisioned IOPS would be exceedingly expensive. And
The last word goes to Rob, who's remote and is delightful, and Paul, who kicked it off. So, Rob, if you're with us, any final thoughts at this very moment in time?
No, I hope you all enjoy your dinner. It sounds awesome.
brain fog does.
My one thought was the one thing I was going to say is that at least at one point, Delphix, now Perforce, did do like roughly day by day performance tests that included tests of the tests like of ZFS that like were relevant to their stuff. I don't know if they still do that because I haven't been there in a year, but it is possible to do. And when they're here on Monday, we could ask them how they feel about doing that.
Do you know,
and talk
was
about
that just real hardware stuck in a corner?
Yeah, it was real hardware in a data center.
I was testing where I was taking
A pool that I was moving between OSs, but the same pool, which one? The performance testing. That said, I still don't necessarily know that the disks are necessarily going to perform
the same spot as they are this spot because it's fiscal.
But the developer summit, there will be more organizations here with a bunch of resources that are, dedicated to deploying or creating ZFS at scale. So there may be a conversation to have with people then, is the last thing I wanted to bring up.
Because, the other question is like, are you starting with a fresh pool? Each one of these benchmarks are doing once a day? Or are you keeping the pool from last time?
Ask for what you want.
Right. But, then over time, maybe your pool gets fragmented and that affects performance. It makes it look like you have a regression when you don't, and so on. So far, the main one when we thought we saw a performance regression between, I think it was 2.1 and 2.3, it turned out it was the RAID Z sit-out feature. When you use all NVMe drives, the latencies are so close that the difference made it look like one NVMe was bad when it was actually just, a couple % slower because it was over Fabric.